The transport doors opened to a wall of white death. Owen Hart stumbled forward as something hard struck his back, sending him sprawling onto ice so cold it burned through his prison uniform in seconds. Behind him, the rallying guards laughed, their respirators hissing as they leaned out to watch. 3 days, one called down. That's the record for your species. The transport engines roared, kicking up a blizzard of ice crystals that tore at Owen's exposed skin. He curled into a ball, arms wrapped around his head as the ship lifted away. The sound faded quickly, swallowed by wind that screamed across the frozen wasteland like something alive and hungry. Owen had never felt cold like this. It was beyond temperature, beyond discomfort. It was pain that went straight to the bone, settling there like broken glass. His hands were already losing feeling. His breath came in short gasps that turned to ice on his lips. He forced himself to move. Rolling onto his knees took everything he had. Standing was worse. The wind hit him full force, nearly knocking him back down. Through streaming eyes, he could barely see 10 feet in any direction. Just endless white, broken occasionally by dark shapes that might have been rocks or ice formations. The uniform they'd given him was thin synthetic material, meant for climate-controlled prison cells, not this. Owen's teeth chattered so hard he thought they might break. He wrapped his arms around himself and started walking, not because he had a destination, but because standing still meant death. His feet crunched through the surface layer of ice with each step. Beneath was something harder, almost like stone. The wind came from his left, so he kept it there, using it as a crude compass. If he wandered in circles out here, he'd die within hours. Time became meaningless. He walked until his legs stopped responding properly, stumbling more than stepping. His mind started to drift. He thought about the cargo bay where he'd worked, the warmth of the engines, the smell of recycled air. He thought about the rallian who'd framed him, who'd planted military-grade weapons in his shipment, and then reported him to authorities. He thought about how the trial had lasted less than an hour. Something dark appeared in the white. Owen blinked, trying to focus. A structure, man-made or at least made by someone. He forced his legs to move faster, fear giving him a brief surge of energy. If it was a mirage, if his mind was already breaking down, he didn't want to know. He just wanted to reach it. The structure was real, an outpost half buried in ice and snow, but solid. The door hung at an angle, frozen open just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Owen didn't hesitate. He pushed inside and collapsed. The interior was dark and barely warmer than outside, but it blocked the wind. That alone felt like paradise. Owen lay on the metal floor, shaking violently, his body trying desperately to generate heat it didn't have. Slowly, painfully, his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through gaps in the walls. The outpost had been a mining operation once. Equipment lay scattered and broken, covered in frost. Supply crates were stacked against one wall, most of them empty or smashed. But there were tools. Owen could see them hanging from hooks, preserved by the cold and dry air. He crawled deeper inside, looking for anything useful. His hands were clumsy, fingers barely responding. In what had been a storage room, he found emergency thermal blankets, the kind designed for vacuum exposure. They were old, maybe decades old, but intact. Owen wrapped 3 of them around himself, creating a cocoon of silver material. The shaking slowed, not much but enough that he could think again. The outpost had no power, no heat, nothing automated that might help him survive. But it had walls and a roof. It had tools. Owen had spent 10 years maintaining cargo haulers, fixing everything from life support to engine manifolds with whatever materials were available. He could work with this. He found a corner that seemed most sheltered from the gaps in the walls and made it his base. The thermal blankets helped, but they wouldn't be enough when night came. Owen had no idea how long days lasted on this planet, but he could already see the light fading through the cracks. Using a prying tool, he began pulling apart the broken equipment, looking for anything he could use. Power cells were dead. Electronics were fried by cold and time, but there were metal plates, insulation material, and wiring. In one of the crates, he found a manual mining laser, its charge depleted but its components intact. The temperature was dropping. Owen could feel it even through the blankets. His breath was visible now, coming out in thick clouds. He worked faster, his plan forming. The outpost had a ventilation system, probably meant to keep air circulating when it was occupied. The main shaft was still intact. He began building in the corner, using metal plates to create a box. He insulated it with material stripped from old suits and equipment. The mining laser came apart in his hands, yielding a heating element and power converter. He connected them to a manual charge generator he found in the maintenance section. It took hours. His hands kept going numb, forcing him to stop and warm them against his body. But piece by piece, the device took shape. Not sophisticated, not elegant, just functional. When he was done, Owen had created something simple. A stone oven, more or less, heated by electrical elements he could charge manually. It wouldn't keep the whole outpost warm, but it might keep him alive. He cranked the generator until his arms ached, building up charge. Then he activated the heating element. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he felt it. Warmth. Actual, real warmth radiating from the metal box. Owen pulled his thermal blankets closer to the makeshift oven and settled in for the night. Outside, the wind howled louder. The temperature was still dropping. But here, in this corner with his crude creation, he had heat. He had shelter. He had a chance. The guards had given him 3 days. Owen intended to prove them wrong. 43 days had passed since the transport dumped Owen on the ice. He knew because he scratched a mark on the outpost wall after each sleep cycle, though he wasn't entirely sure his count was accurate. The planet's days seemed to stretch longer than Earth standard, the nights even more so. The stone oven had saved his life. He'd refined it over the weeks, adding better insulation and a second heating element salvaged from a broken environmental suit. It burned through charge faster than he liked, but the manual generator gave him something to do during the endless dark hours. Crank the handle, build the charge, stay warm, stay alive. Food was the bigger problem. The outpost had contained emergency rations, enough for maybe 2 weeks if he stretched them. Those were gone now. Owen had been forced to venture out into the frozen wasteland to find alternatives. The first time he discovered the ice deposits, he'd thought they were just geological formations. Massive chunks of crystallized material jutting up from the ground at odd angles. But when he'd chipped off a piece and brought it back to thaw near the oven, he'd found organic matter inside. Plant life maybe, or something close enough. Frozen for who knew how many years. It burned, that was the important part. He could thaw it, dry it, and use it as fuel for a fire if he built one outside the outpost. And some of it, the parts that looked less like tree bark and more like moss, could be chewed. It tasted like frozen dirt and provided almost no nutrition, but it kept his stomach from eating itself. Today was warmer, only -20 by his estimate, judging by how long it took for his breath to freeze on his makeshift scarf. Owen had learned to recognize the weather patterns. Every 12 days or so, the temperature would rise just enough for him to venture farther from the outpost. He carried a salvaged mining pick and a sack made from torn thermal blankets. The ice deposits were scattered across the plain, some close, others requiring hours of walking. He'd marked a route using pieces of metal driven into the ice, creating a trail he could follow even in poor visibility. The wind was almost calm, just a steady push against his back. Owen moved between deposits, chipping off pieces and stuffing them in his sack. His hands were wrapped in layers of insulation material, clumsy but protected. He'd learned that lesson after losing feeling in 2 fingers for a whole day. He was working on his 4th deposit when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or ice, something alive. A rasp, wet and labored, coming from somewhere nearby. Owen froze, listening. The sound came again, weaker this time. He turned slowly, scanning the area, nothing but ice and the distant shapes of more deposits. Then he saw it. A crevasse, narrow and deep, partially hidden by an overhang of frozen material. Every survival instinct told him to leave. Nothing good lived on this planet. The guards had mentioned predators in their mocking farewell speech. But the sound came again, and Owen found himself walking toward the crevasse despite his better judgment. The gap was barely wide enough for him to look down into. The sides were smooth ice, dropping at least 20 feet. At the bottom, something moved. It took Owen's eyes a moment to make sense of what he was seeing. An animal. Definitely an animal. About the size of a large dog, covered in thick pale fur marked with darker spots. It lay on its side, one rear leg bent at a wrong angle. Wound on its flank crusted with frozen blood. The creature's head lifted slightly. Owen saw crystalline structures jutting from around its face, whiskers maybe, catching what little light filtered down. Its eyes were huge and dark, adapted for low light. They fixed on Owen with an intensity that made him step back from the edge. The animal made that rasping sound again, not aggressive, just tired, dying. Owen should have walked away. He knew that. Whatever this thing was, it was a predator. The muscles visible through its fur, the size of its paws, the small horns beginning to emerge from its skull, all screamed danger. When it grew to full size, if it survived, it would be more than capable of killing him. But it wasn't full-sized now. It was young, injured, and starving. Owen could see its ribs through the fur. The wound on its side was infected, the flesh around it dark and swollen. He sat at the edge of the crevasse for a long time, thinking. The creature watched him with those huge eyes, too weak to do more than breathe. Finally, Owen made his decision. Probably a stupid one, but he'd made a lot of those lately. Getting down was easier than he expected. The ice walls had enough irregularities to serve as handholds. Getting back up with the animal would be the hard part. The creature tried to snarl when Owen got close, but the sound was pathetic. No strength behind it. Owen moved slowly, talking in a low voice, the same tone he'd used to calm nervous workers in the cargo bays. He wrapped the animal in his outer layer, the one made from thermal blanket material, bundling it as carefully as he could. It was heavier than it looked, dead weight, limp and unresisting. Owen managed to get it over his shoulder and began the climb back up. His arms shook with effort. His fingers, already cold, went numb from gripping the ice. But he made it to the top, dragging himself and his burden over the edge. The walk back to the outpost took twice as long as it should have. Owen had to stop every few minutes to rest, his muscles screaming. The creature remained still, either unconscious or too weak to struggle. Inside the outpost, Owen laid the animal near his stone oven in the warmest spot. He unwrapped it carefully, examining the wounds. The leg wasn't broken, just badly sprained. The wound on its side was worse, infected and deep. Claw marks, maybe from a fight with something larger. Owen had basic medical. Supplies from the outpost's emergency kit. Antiseptic, bandages, and a tube of antibiotic gel that was probably expired but better than nothing. He cleaned the wound as best he could, the creature too weak to resist. Its breathing was shallow, rapid. He squeezed antibiotic gel into the wound and wrapped it with clean bandages. Then he covered the animal with thermal blankets and settled back to wait. The creature slept. Owen sat beside his oven, feeding it fuel and cranking the generator. Outside, the temperature was dropping again as night approached. Inside, two survivors huddled near a makeshift heat source, both betting on tomorrow. Owen named her Frost on the third day, mostly because he needed something to call her besides the creature, or that thing. She'd been conscious for 2 days now, watching him with those enormous dark eyes, but not moving much beyond lifting her head to track his movements around the outpost. The wound was healing, slowly but healing. Owen changed the bandages twice a day, cleaning the injury with melted ice water he boiled over a small fire he'd built in a salvaged metal container. Frost didn't fight him anymore. She'd tried once on that first day, managing a weak snap that didn't come close to reaching him. After that, she seemed to understand he was helping. The real problem was food. Frost wouldn't touch the frozen biomass Owen had been surviving on. He'd tried offering it to her several times, holding out pieces near her mouth. She just turned her head away, that rasping breath getting weaker. Owen realized he'd have to hunt. Actually hunt, not just scavenge from ice deposits. The thought terrified him. He'd seen tracks in the snow during his fuel-gathering trips, massive prints that suggested things much larger than Frost lived on this planet. But she was starving, and without food, the wound wouldn't matter. She'd die anyway. He fashioned a spear from a piece of metal pipe and a sharpened bracket. Not sophisticated, but better than nothing. Then he ventured out into the ice canyons he'd been avoiding, following the smaller tracks he sometimes saw. The first hunt lasted 6 hours and yielded nothing but exhaustion and 3 close calls with crevasses hidden under snow. The second hunt, 2 days later, was worse. Owen tracked something for miles before losing the trail in an area where the wind had scoured the ice clean. On the third hunt, he got lucky. He found a burrow entrance almost invisible against the ice. Inside, something moved. Owen didn't let himself think about it. He just thrust the spear down and pulled back, dragging out something that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a seal. It was already dead, the spear having found something vital. Frost ate. Owen had never seen anything eat with such desperate hunger. She tore into the carcass with teeth designed for ripping, swallowing chunks without bothering to chew. When she was done, she looked at Owen with what might have been gratitude, then went back to sleep. After that, Owen hunted every few days. He got better at it, learning where the burrows were, which tracks meant prey versus predator. Frost grew stronger, the wound closing to a pink scar. By the end of the second week, she could stand. By the third, she could walk, favoring the injured leg but mobile. Owen came back from a hunt one evening to find Frost had moved. Not far, just from her spot by the oven to the doorway, where she sat watching the ice plains. Her crystalline whiskers caught the fading light, creating small rainbows in the frost that coated them. "You planning to leave?" Owen asked, setting down his sack. He'd gotten used to talking to her the same way he talked to himself. The sound of a voice, even his own, helped keep the isolation from crushing him. Frost turned her head, regarding him with those huge eyes. Then she stood, limped back to the oven, and settled down in her usual spot. Owen laughed, surprising himself. It had been a long time since he'd found anything funny. The real change came during a cold snap that hit harder than anything Owen had experienced so far. The temperature dropped so fast his crude thermometer couldn't track it. The wind screamed around the outpost, finding every gap, every crack. His stone oven worked at maximum output, and it still wasn't enough. Owen huddled in his corner, wrapped in every thermal blanket he had, shaking violently. His teeth chattered too hard to clench. Ice was forming on the inside of the walls. He'd added fuel to the oven 3 times in the last hour, burning through his reserves. Something heavy pressed against him. Owen looked down to find Frost had moved from her spot and was now lying along his side, her body radiating heat like a furnace. She was warm, actually warm, her fur somehow trapping and generating heat in a way that didn't make sense. "Thanks," Owen managed through chattering teeth. Frost made a sound, a low rumble he felt more than heard. It vibrated through his chest, oddly soothing. They stayed like that through the night. Owen eventually stopped shaking, the combination of Frost's warmth and the oven bringing his core temperature back to something survivable. When he woke the next morning, she was still there, her breathing slow and steady. After that, Frost started following him on supply runs. She was still recovering, moving with a slight limp, but she refused to stay behind. The first time she came along, Owen worried she'd run off or lead predators back to the outpost. Instead, she stayed close, her crystalline whiskers twitching as she scanned the environment. She saved his life on the 5th supply run together. Owen had been working on an ice deposit when Frost suddenly went rigid. Her lips pulled back from her teeth, and she made a sound he'd never heard before. A warning, deep and resonant. Something moved in the distance, large, white, barely visible against the snow. Owen only caught a glimpse before Frost pushed against him, hurting him back toward the outpost. They moved quickly, Frost constantly looking back, that warning rumble continuing. Whatever it was didn't follow, but Owen understood the message. Frost had detected a threat he'd completely missed. She'd warned him, protected him. That night, Owen found a data chip while sorting through old equipment lockers. He'd missed it before, buried under frozen paperwork. The chip was coded for a prisoner who died years ago, but it still worked when he plugged it into a salvaged reader. The information made his blood run cold. Glacian stalkers. That's what Frost was. The files detailed them as apex predators responsible for the deaths of multiple survey teams. Adults grew to massive sizes, possessed incredible strength, and were considered impossible to approach safely. The Galactic Union had quarantine zones around their territories. Owen looked at Frost, who was sleeping near the oven. She barely reached his knee in height. When she was full-grown, she'd be the size of a cargo hauler. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt oddly calm. Frost had chosen to stay. She'd shared her warmth when he was dying from cold. She'd warned him of danger. Whatever she would become, right now she was just a survivor, same as him. Owen deleted the file and went to sleep. The storm came with almost no warning. Owen had been outside gathering fuel when the wind shifted. One moment it was blowing steady from the east. The next, it was coming from all directions at once, swirling in violent gusts that nearly knocked him off his feet. The temperature dropped like a stone. Owen's exposed skin went numb in seconds. He grabbed his half-filled sack and ran for the outpost, Frost loping ahead of him. The sky had turned a dark gray-green color he'd never seen before, and the wind was screaming. They made it inside just as the full force hit. The outpost shuddered, metal groaning under the impact. Owen slammed the door shut and braced it with a salvaged beam. Not that it mattered much. The walls had too many gaps, and wind was already howling through them like the outpost was a musical instrument. The temperature inside was plummeting. Owen fired up his stone oven to maximum, feeding it every bit of fuel he had. It wasn't enough. Frost paced near the door, agitated, making sounds Owen had learned meant distress. Then she started digging. Her claws, retracted most of the time, extended fully. They looked like frosted glass, translucent and sharp. She attacked the floor in the corner opposite the door, tearing through the metal with a sound that set Owen's teeth on edge. "What are you doing?" Owen shouted over the wind. Frost ignored him, digging with frantic intensity. Metal peeled back under her claws. Beneath it was permafrost, hard as concrete. Owen understood. The outpost was built on bedrock, but there was a gap, a space between the foundation and the frozen ground. Frost was trying to reach it, trying to dig down where the temperature would be more stable. He grabbed tools and joined her. His mining pick bit into the permafrost, sending up chips of frozen earth. Together they worked, Owen using tools while Frost used claws. The wind outside rose to a shriek that sounded almost alive. The walls were coated in ice now, frost spreading across every surface. They broke through into empty space after an hour of brutal work. A cavity beneath the foundation, maybe 3 feet deep and as wide as the corner. Not much, but it was something. Owen widened the opening while Frost disappeared into the space, her body blocking his view of what she was doing. The stone oven was barely keeping up. Owen's breath was freezing before it left his mouth. His fingers were going numb. Despite the insulated wrapping, he worked faster, desperation giving him strength he didn't know he had. When the opening was large enough, Owen grabbed his oven, disconnected it from the generator, and lowered it into the cavity. Frost had cleared a space, pushing frozen dirt against the walls to create a crude den. Owen followed the oven down, bringing thermal blankets, the generator, and his remaining fuel. The cavity was cramped. Owen could barely sit upright, and Frost took up most of the floor space. But it was noticeably warmer than the outpost above. The earth itself provided insulation, and Frost's body heat filled the small space. Owen reconnected the oven and cranked the generator. The heating element glowed red, and warmth began to build. He used metal plates from his tool kit to create a partial roof over their shelter, then packed frozen dirt around the edges to seal gaps. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Above them, the outpost disintegrated. Owen heard metal tearing, the shriek of wind finding new paths through the structure. Something heavy crashed down, then another impact and another. Frost pressed against him, that low rumble vibrating through her chest. The storm lasted 6 days. Owen knew because he kept scratching marks on the dirt wall, one after each sleep cycle. The temperature in their den stayed just above freezing, livable only because of the oven and Frost's warmth. Above, the wind never stopped. It roared and screamed like something trying to claw its way in. Food ran out on the third day. Owen had managed to grab some of his stored supplies before retreating to the den, but not enough. By the fifth day, his stomach was a constant ache. Frost hadn't eaten since before the storm, and Owen could see her ribs starting to show again. On the sixth day, something small and desperate dug into their den from the side. A warren creature, one of the rabbit-seal things Owen hunted. It must have been burrowing through the frozen ground, fleeing the storm, and broke through into their shelter by accident. Frost moved faster than Owen could track. One moment the creature was there. The next it was dead, Frost's jaws around its neck. She ate half and pushed the rest toward Owen. He stared at the raw meat. Every civilized instinct recoiled, but he was starving and there was no way to cook it without filling their tiny space with smoke. Owen closed his eyes and ate. Tearing off pieces with his teeth, it was the worst thing he'd ever tasted. It was also the best. Frost made that rumbling sound again, settling against him. Owen realized she'd given him half, even though she was just as hungry. The bond between them had shifted into something deeper. They weren't just sharing space anymore. They were family. The storm finally broke on the seventh morning. The wind died to a whisper, then stopped entirely. Owen dug his way up through the debris-filled opening and emerged into a transformed landscape. The outpost was gone, just gone, torn apart and scattered across the ice plain. Only the foundation remained with their den beneath it. The ice deposits Owen had marked were buried or destroyed. The trail he'd carefully laid out was erased. Owen stood in the ruins and laughed. It was either that or cry. Everything he'd built, all his supplies, his carefully organized survival setup, destroyed in 6 days. Frost climbed out of the den behind him, shaking ice from her fur. She was bigger than when the storm started, Owen realized, growing fast despite the lack of food. Her horns were more prominent, her muscles more defined under the thick coat. She sat beside him, looking out at the wasteland. Then she made a sound, not the warning rumble or the distress call, but something new, almost curious. Owen looked where she was looking. In the distance, barely visible, was a shape. Another outpost maybe, or a different type of structure. He'd never seen it before. The storm must have cleared enough ice to reveal it. "Want to check it out?" Owen asked. Frost stood, her tail swishing. Owen took that as a yes. They'd survived the worst the planet could throw at them. Together, whatever came next, they'd face it the same way. The ship landed 3 months after the storm. Owen saw it from nearly a mile away, its engines burning bright against the gray sky. He and Frost had relocated to the structure they'd spotted after the storm, a larger facility that had once processed ore. It had mostly intact walls and an actual roof, luxuries Owen had almost forgotten existed. Frost was nearly full-grown now, standing as tall as Owen's chest at the shoulder. Her horns had developed into curved spikes, and her crystalline whiskers were longer, more elaborate. She could take down the larger predators that roamed the ice plains, and she did so regularly, keeping them both fed. Owen watched the ship land and felt his stomach drop. Nobody came to Frost Ridge except to dump prisoners. But this ship was wrong. Too clean, too well-maintained. It settled on the ice with precision that spoke of skilled pilots, not prison transport crews. "We should hide," Owen said. Frost was already moving, her instincts better than his. They retreated into the processing facility, watching from a broken window as figures emerged from the ship. 5 of them, 4 different species Owen recognized from his cargo hauling days. The leader was Vorshin, tall and scaled, with the confident swagger of someone used to being in charge. The others carried equipment that definitely wasn't standard prison guard issue. Scanners, weapons, and what looked like stasis containers. Poachers, Owen had heard about them in the cargo bays. People who hunted endangered species for the black market, selling to collectors who didn't care about Galactic Union conservation laws. They were scanning, following some kind of trail. Owen's heart sank as he realized they were tracking heat signatures. His stone oven, rebuilt in the new facility, was probably showing up like a beacon. We could run, Owen whispered. Frost made a low sound, not quite a growl. She didn't like the idea either. Running meant abandoning their shelter, their supplies, everything they'd built. And in this cold, that meant death. The poachers found them within an hour. They approached the facility carefully, weapons ready. The Vortian leader called out in trade standard. "We know you're in there. Come out. We're not prison guards." Owen stepped into view slowly, hands visible. Frost stayed hidden, her training from months of hunting serving her well. The poachers relaxed slightly when they saw him. "A human," the Vortian said, surprise clear in his voice. "Impossible. Nobody survives more than a week on this rock." "I got lucky," Owen said, keeping his voice neutral. "Lucky indeed." The Vortian's eyes narrowed. "We detected 2 heat signatures, large ones. You have a Glacian stalker in there." There was no point denying it. Owen nodded. The Vortian smiled, an expression that showed too many teeth. "Excellent. We've been tracking stalker populations for months. A juvenile trained by a human. Do you have any idea how much that's worth?" "Not for sale," Owen said. "Everything's for sale." The Vortian gestured, and his crew spread out, surrounding the facility. "Here's the offer. Help us capture the stalker peacefully, and we'll take you off this planet. Give you a new identity, set you up somewhere nice. You'll never see the inside of a prison again." Owen's mind raced. Part of him, the part that was tired of being cold and hungry and isolated, wanted to take the deal. But Frost had saved his life, had chosen to stay when she could have left, had shared her food, her warmth, her companionship. "No," Owen said. The Vortian's smile disappeared. "Wrong answer. We'll take both of you then. The stalker for sale, you to dump back on the ice after we leave." They moved fast. Tranquilizer darts hissed through the air. Owen dove aside and Frost exploded from her hiding place. She was massive now, all muscle and fury. Her claws extended and she caught the nearest poacher across the chest, sending him flying. The fight was chaos. Frost moved like liquid, impossibly fast for something her size. The poacher's weapons were meant for stationary targets, not a predator that could change direction mid-leap. Owen grabbed a piece of broken pipe and swung it at a poacher trying to flank Frost. A tranquilizer dart caught Frost in the shoulder. She stumbled but didn't go down. Another dart hit her flank. She was slowing, the drugs working their way through her system. Owen screamed, charging at the shooter with his pipe. The Vortian leader raised his weapon, aiming not at Frost but at Owen. The shot never came. Frost, even drugged, threw herself between them. Her shoulder hit the Vortian like a battering ram and they both went down. The weapon flew from the Vortian's hands, skittering across the ice. Owen grabbed it. He'd never fired a weapon before, but desperation made things simple. He pointed it at the remaining poachers and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke his wrist. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make them scatter. Frost was down now, the tranquilizers finally taking full effect. Her breathing was slow, labored. Owen ran to her side, checking for injuries. Blood matted her fur where one of the darts had torn through, but she was alive. The poachers regrouped, but they'd lost their confidence. 2 of their crew were down, and the human had their leader's weapon. The Vortian pushed himself up, scales torn and bleeding. "You've made a mistake," he snarled. "We can't leave now. Our ship took damage in the fight. We need parts to repair it." Owen looked at the ship. Sure enough, one of the landing struts was broken, probably when Frost had slammed into it while drugged. The hull showed scoring from her claws. "Then I guess you're stuck here," Owen said, "just like me." The Vortian's expression was pure hatred. "We'll hunt you, track you across every kilometer of this frozen hell, and when we find you, you'll both die slowly." Owen helped Frost to her feet. She was coming around, fighting off the drugs with sheer stubbornness. Together, they backed away from the facility, leaving the poachers to their damaged ship. The hunt had begun. The first poacher died on the 4th day. Owen and Frost found his body frozen solid in a crevasse, his equipment scattered around him. He'd been pursuing them alone, too confident in his scanning gear. The ice had other ideas. The 2nd and 3rd went together on day 9. Frost tracked them to a canyon where they'd set up camp, then led Owen around to a position above them. A few well-placed charges from salvaged mining equipment brought half the canyon wall down, quick and clean. That left the Vortian leader and one other, a Kellian engineer who'd been trying to repair their ship. But without parts, without proper tools, the ship remained grounded. Their emergency beacon had been broadcasting for weeks, but nobody was coming. Frost Ridge was off the regular patrol routes, and poachers didn't file flight plans. Owen knew they were getting desperate. He'd found traps, crude but effective, scattered across the routes between the old facilities. Frost detected most of them, her crystalline whiskers somehow sensing the electromagnetic signatures. The one she missed, Owen's paranoia caught. They'd been living nomadic for 3 weeks now, moving between shelters, never staying in one place long enough to be cornered. Owen carried his stone oven disassembled in a pack. Frost hunted for both of them, taking down prey with efficiency that would have terrified him months ago. The end came at the original outpost, or what was left of it. The foundation where Owen and Frost had weathered the storm. The Vortian had set up there, making it his base of operations. Owen spotted the camp from a distance. "We could leave them," Owen said quietly. "Just wait until they freeze or starve." Frost made a sound he'd learned meant disagreement. She was right. As long as the poachers were alive, they'd be a threat, and that beacon would eventually bring someone, maybe more poachers, maybe worse. They approached at night, when the temperature dropped low enough that thermal scans became unreliable. Frost's white coat made her nearly invisible against the snow. Owen had learned to move quietly, lessons taught by months of hunting. The Vortian was alone. The Kellian engineer lay frozen near the remains of their ship, another victim of the planet's brutality. The Vortian himself looked half dead, his scales dull, his movements sluggish, but he was still dangerous. Owen could see weapons within reach, and the Vortian's eyes tracked them as they approached. "Come to finish it," the Vortian called out, his voice rough. "Come to end it," Owen replied, "one way or another." The Vortian laughed, a bitter sound. "You've won already. I'm dead whether you kill me or not. The cold will take me in days." "Then why fight?" "Pride." The Vortian reached for a weapon. Frost moved, but Owen held up a hand, stopping her. The Vortian raised an energy rifle, aiming it at Owen. His hands shook from cold and weakness. "I won't die alone." The shot went wide, not by much, but enough. Before the Vortian could fire again, Frost was on him. It was over in seconds. The Vortian had been a skilled hunter once, but he was no match for an apex predator in her prime. Owen turned away, giving Frost privacy to feed. He walked to the ship, examining it with new eyes. The damage was extensive, but maybe not irreparable. He'd spent years maintaining cargo haulers. The principles were the same. He was still examining the ship when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to wind or predators. Engines, different from the poacher ship, heavier, more powerful. Owen looked up to see a galactic Union patrol vessel descending through the clouds. They'd finally responded to the beacon. The patrol landed and armed guards emerged, weapons ready. They found Owen standing beside the wreckage, Frost beside him, blood still fresh on her muzzle. The guards' weapons tracked Frost, fingers on triggers. "Easy," Owen said, stepping between them and Frost. "She's with me." What followed was hours of questioning. Owen told them most of the truth. The poachers, the fights, the survival. He left out certain details, like exactly how each poacher had died. The patrol's xenobiologist, a elderly Threxian, examined Frost with undisguised wonder. "Impossible," she kept muttering. "Glacian stalkers don't bond. They barely tolerate their own species." "She's different," Owen said simply. The patrol captain, a human woman named Rivera, pulled Owen aside. "We're offering you full pardon. The charges that sent you here were dropped 2 months ago. Evidence came out proving you were framed. You're free to go." Owen looked at Frost, who was tolerating the xenobiologist's examination with surprising patience. "What about her?" "Regulations require endangered species to be relocated to conservation zones. She'll be well cared for." "Alone," Owen said, "in a cage." Rivera's expression softened. "It's the law, I'm sorry." Owen thought about everything they'd been through. The cold, the hunger, the storm, the fights. Frost had chosen to stay with him at every point where she could have left. She'd saved his life more times than he could count. "Then I'm staying too," Owen said. Rivera blinked. "What?" "This is a penal colony. I'm choosing to remain. My right under Galactic Union law." "You'll die here." "Maybe." Owen looked at the ruins of the outpost, the foundation that had sheltered them through the worst storm. "Or maybe I'll build something." The patrol left supplies. Medical equipment, tools, building materials, even a communication beacon Owen could use for emergencies. Rivera tried one more time to convince him to leave, but Owen's mind was made up. As the patrol ship lifted away, Owen and Frost stood together watching it disappear into the clouds. The temperature was dropping, another night coming. But Owen had his stone oven, now properly rebuilt with the new materials. He had shelter. He had Frost. 3 years later, Frost Ridge had changed. Owen's settlement had grown, built around that original foundation. Other survivors, prisoners who'd somehow endured, found their way to him. He taught them what he'd learned, how to build ovens, how to hunt, how to survive. Frost had cubs now, a litter of 3. They played in the snow while their mother watched, the same way Owen watched over his growing community. The Galactic Union monitored them from orbit, xenobiologists filing reports about the impossible bond between humans and stalkers. Owen stood in the doorway of his home, warmth from a proper stone fireplace at his back. A new arrival was learning to build their first oven, struggling with the same problems Owen had faced. He walked over to help, Frost following. Behind. The winter hadn't broken him. It had given him something he'd never had in the civilized galaxy: purpose, family, home. And it had all